everyone's doing well. A little bit of rain, that's great too. Boy, that'll really get the flowers blooming, and the desert will be full of life. We'll begin with a prayer, and then we will have our little quiet time. And it's great to know that some people who've been watching it online after the fact have been following the quiet prayer time too. So that's great. So our opening prayer this morning for the week of the fourth Sunday in Lent comes from 1 Corinthians 13. It's verses 4 to 7, and you'll recognize it right away. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Amen.
Amen.
Perfect prayer with love for our fourth week session of Letting Go in Love. Letting Go in Love. So let's take a few moments now to just get ourselves comfortable and ready, put aside all the busyness of what's gone on this morning and what's going to go on the rest of the day. Chances to focus ourselves. So like we've done before, and for those watching on YouTube after the fact, just close your eyes and maybe do 4 to 5 slow breaths in, hold for a moment, and slowly out, and then we'll take about 3 minutes just to have some quiet. Okay, here we go. as I mentioned, we're week 4, and the theme this week is letting go in love. We're at the halfway point. Actually, we're now just going beyond that. We've done 3 weeks, and today, plus the next 2, are the last 3 weeks. Lent seems to speed up on the second half for some reason. I wanted to spend a few moments talking about, good morning, talking about the times you've had on your own at home, how they've been going. What's been your successes? What's been your joys in those quiet times, your daily reflections, reading, prayer, writing, journaling, whatever you're doing? And what's maybe been some of your challenges as we're at the halfway point? So it's not about the topic specifically, but just the practice of the daily. And be honest, if it's been hard, if busyness has gotten in the way and you've had to catch up the second day after or whatever. So anyone like to share what's been your successes and your joys in it, and what's been your challenges? Bobby? I'll use this here for the video's sake. There we go.
Finding the little snippets in all of this that just really speak to you, and you understand a lot more. What's been difficult is finding the time, and I find I'm often doing 2 or 3 at a time. Yeah.
Other sharing, any comments from anyone else? How you've been finding it in terms of your time? Have there been any sort of breakthroughs, perhaps, by having that time? That you might be able to continue beyond our Lenten study in your regular daily life?
I found that I try to do these readings in the morning, and those of you who know me well know that I'm not a morning person. But I do this, and I also do the forward day by day. And online, I do, there's a word for the day put out by the Society of St. John the Evangelist. And it's just a one word and then a very short little reflection. And I really enjoyed that. And I find with these readings that I spend a lot of time patting myself on the back with the good things that I've been doing. And then trying to ignore the things that I haven't been doing. But later on in the day, usually one of those sentences or ideas comes back to me, and I think, well, this is the next project on the agenda.
And you were saying, just as a reference, so SSJE, Society of St. John the Evangelist, and it's a word of the day. So they can go on to, I don't know if it's .org or whatever it is, but they can go and find it.
Right.
So it's just again, another tool that you can have. And the wonderful things about studies like this that is encouraging us to have daily time is that it's not just the 6 weeks of the study. It's really to help us develop a routine of life that will help guide us beyond this. So as we have our moments, or some days are crazy, hopefully some of the practices that you've learned, the quietness, you can continue to hold on to and guide you beyond. So anyone else want to just share something? Doris?
Well, I don't know whether you consider this fluff or not, but I've been getting Mornings with Jesus, and I've been reading that. It's published by Guideposts, and they have various contributors, and it's usually a one-page thought about how their lives are affected by Jesus, and it, along with forward day by day, and Lenten study. It's a good way to start your day.
Good. Anyone else like? Oh, Orgy and then Sharon.
Well, this Lenten season has been very difficult, I find myself, really not being as disciplined and focused as I normally am, and I wonder if it's because usually for Lent I give up something, usually my addiction is sugar. I haven't done that this year, and maybe that's the one missing link. It's been very frustrating. So I can go 2 days at a time without, doing any of my readings, and I try and catch up. And so I'm trying not to beat myself over the head with it and getting too anxious and frustrated about it. So I'm hoping to hit the reset button, today.
Good, thank you. And Sharon.
I do my time with Jesus every morning. I'm up very early, so the house is quiet, and I have my cup of coffee with him. And I have my devotion, my daily devotion is a little book called Jesus is Calling. And I'm kind of excited in the morning to get up and read that page to find out what he's got to tell me and where I'm going and what kind of day it's almost going to be. So when the day starts after that, I've already been close with him, and he tells me how, he walks with me, he'll be with me. So my day starts out happy and feeling good, and I'm prepared, I guess, when something's going to happen or whatever, if it's not my way, I have him to fall back on and for what he said to me.
Thank you.
I've always had a morning practice of, I combine daily prayer, it's a Celtic prayer book I use, along with sitting for 10 minutes. And I also am reading a book, I can't think of the author right off the top of my head, but it's all about animals. And she did one for Advent, and it was for every day, but with Lent, it's animals that are going extinct. And it's like every other day, is what I read. And it's not only fascinating to learn about some of these animals you never heard of before. Today's animal was called a dragon. It lives in the depths of caves in Croatia, and they're finding it's being killed off by pesticides, not good sewage, et cetera, and so, and that's what's happening to a lot of these animals, and I really enjoy reading this particular book, but I also always, like I said, have a morning practice, and what's difficult for me is if I have someone staying at the house, and my prayer practice is befuddled, to say the least. And they try so hard to be quiet, and I'll say I'm going to go do my prayers, and it's really difficult. That's probably my biggest challenge, is when someone else comes and stays with me, or when I go camping and stay with other people and they want you to be out drinking coffee and hiking and blah, blah, blah. So that's my challenge.
Uh, Thank you. Before we continue with this week's theme, I wanted to just touch a bit on last week. Because again, we meet Tuesday, and there's so many days beyond the Tuesday left in the week. So last week was about health and well-being. And I was wondering, before we talk about the question is there anything that you would like to share coming out of your own personal reflections or note-taking or something from the past week that you feel you want to share with us, and maybe someone else may benefit from your own experience? Oh, Jenny?
Yes, I feel these classes have kind of been a review of the things I've been dealing with and have dealt with. So I've let go of it, and so I'm looking forward to what God has in store for me next. You know, that's gone now, and so we'll see.
Thank you. So I have one question up here, which I wanted to have us break into little groups to talk about before we go on to this week. The question is there an area in your life that can benefit from being less cluttered? Okay? I always love when you people try. So, 3 areas that came up in the questions was being less cluttered mentally. Like, you know, sometimes we think too much, we get involved too much in our minds. Physically, are there things that we're doing too much of physically? Okay? And, of course, emotionally. So what I'd like you to do, and it may be one of or all of them, is to break up in groups for about 10 minutes and just talk about that. So is there something in your life that can benefit from being less cluttered? And these are suggested areas here, but there might be something else. And how that affects your well-being. So this is to finish off last week a bit. All right. So, how'd it go? Lots of good sharing. Love to hear some of your thoughts about areas of our life that could maybe benefit from being less cluttered. I know, remember that there used to be posters out that said, "God don't make no junk." I don't know if you know those, but people sure can. And I heard about cluttered houses and basements and other areas, and you got to clear out that stuff to make room for more stuff, right? But also minds. Our minds can be so cluttered that we don't have room to think of other things, maybe more positive things, perhaps. You know, and physically, we do take on sometimes too much. Like really take on too much. Some push themselves to the point of exhaustion, keep themselves busy, sometimes as a way of helping others, but it doesn't always benefit, but it can affect them personally on many levels. I'd love to hear some of your stories, and we do have the microphone we can hand
I
out.
put it on mute, so.
Yeah.
So what?
So who would like to share something? Let's spend a few minutes sharing. Okay, Bobby. Thank you.
We all talked about physical clutter.
Okay.
And the fact that it really does, it bothers you emotionally and mentally to have this things that you need to take care of, maybe don't want to take care of, but still it's on your mind.
And the longer we put off something, it wears us down too, right? We start feeling bad, guilty, whatever's going through our minds.
I resent my stuff.
present. You want to talk about that?
I moved almost a year ago, and I was not happy to have to make the move, but toward the end, I was frantically packing, and my sister-in-law and her sister and husband, who live in the same complex, helped me. I would pack stuff and they would move it over to my new place. And I said, just, put it in the garage and, I'll deal with it later. Well, of course, I've been spending a year trying to find the stuff that I don't know which box it's in. And I swear the boxes are multiplying overnight. But, yeah. And as Orchie said, he's having the same issue. Every time I drive into the garage, it's like they're haunting me. And it's mentally wearing. And, I made a promise that I would deal with one box a day, and that lasted for 2 whole days. And I open a box and it has written material that I've saved and all, and I think, oh, I should just dump the whole thing, and then I'll say, oh, this is good, I like this, and, and then you start reading the stuff, and you put it all back. So,
Yeah.
one other thing I just thought of, though, of course, with Daughters of the King, we have a prayer list, and there are times when it gets quite long. And this past meeting, we culled, shall we say, names that have been on there for a long time and perhaps don't need our immediate prayers. And the list is much shorter, and whew, felt so refreshing that you're not daily faced with this, entire sheet of names. And,
No, I understand.
felt good.
Thank you. Other sharing? Just a few minutes. Something you'd like to oh, were you putting your hand up there? No? Anything else that you could benefit by decluttering, perhaps, within yourself, within your daily living, friendships, whatever? Is there anything? No? Okay, Doris.
I have a very hard time dealing with all the emails. It just drives me up the walls. I don't know where they got my name. No idea. But if I don't open my emails for a couple days, I'll have as many as over 400 messages. And it's exhausting trying to go down and pick out the ones that you know that you should read, and then you have to delete all the others or get into them and say block this sender, and it's just, and I have the same problem with snail mail too. I get so much junk. It's just, I just stand by the recycle bin when I pull it in, take it in from the mailbox, and start dumping it. It's, but I find that it's mentally exhausting to me.
That's a perfect example of a modern day issue. Boy, yeah.
I don't know why
Okay.
everybody's nodding their head, so
Between snail mail, garbage, and phone messages and email, that takes up way too much of our time.
Okay. Annie, you wanted to say something? There it is. And then we'll move on to the next topic.
All right, we all get overwhelmed with clutter in our lives, and I spent my career as a manager, and at one point I was so overwhelmed, my supervisor sat me down and he said, listen, you can't eat an elephant all at once. you have to eat it one bite at a time. So I used that, and I sat down and I broke things down, and I dealt with things, like prioritized and dealt with it a little at a time until my list was clear. So if we take that into our personal lives and say we have too many emails, well then, every day, unsubscribe to 5. The next day, unsubscribe to 5 more. Until finally you get to the point where you have something manageable in your life and you feel a lot freer.
Good tools of
Yeah.
how to do that. Yeah, thank you. I'd like to have a volunteer who can read the gospel reading from Sunday, the Prodigal Son. Could I get a volunteer? Oh, Mary Beth, okay. We'll pass on the microphone to you.
I turned it off. I think it's off.
There you go.
The parable of the prodigal and his brother. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against you and against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the fields, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I may celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.
Thank you. The story is a well-known story, right? We're mostly all familiar with it, and Father Nelson preached on it on Sunday. Scott Stoner says on page 45 that the story is well known because it speaks to the challenges of both loving and letting go within families and with others we love. And he goes on to say, we see letting go happening here with all 3 main characters. We see it as we read of the father being able to let his son go, even though he no doubt was not in favor of his son's choices to go. The younger son had to let go of his pride in order to return to his family home. And the older brother struggles with letting go of his self-righteousness and resentment. Interesting. The themes of letting go coming out of the gospel reading. Letting go. Okay. And that theme of letting go. What barriers do you have, perhaps within your own life, that are an impediment to letting go? You could just think about that for a second. Stubbornness. Okay. Stubbornness.
Being deeply hurt.
Pardon?
Being deeply hurt.
Being deeply hurt.
Resentment.
Resentment.
Jealousy.
Jealousy. There's a bit of that in the story too.
Fear.
Fear. Fear, definitely. Yeah. Other things that just come to your mind, just throw them out. Just word, a word or a couple words.
Control.
I think I know best.
Oh, I think I know best, right? Okay.
Control.
Control,
Yeah. Shame.
shame. Shame. I bet the younger son felt a bit of that too. Shame. Who do you identify most with in the story? And does it change?
Absolutely.
Would anyone like to share, perhaps, you don't have to go into a lot of detail, first of all, who do you identify with right this moment? The father, the younger son, the older son? And was there a time it was someone different? So let's just have a bit of a sharing moment. Okay. So who would like to share? Where do you?
I have a prodigal son story, or a prodigal daughter story in my case.
Product daughter story? Okay.
This thing.
Yep.
Okay. Many years ago, I decided that I wanted to meditate, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know it was normal for your mind to wander. It was after work, and I sat down to do it, and I couldn't rein in my thoughts, and then I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I was mortified at myself that I'm in the middle of a prayer, and I fell asleep, and I thought I was just a terrible person. So I didn't do it again for a very long time, and one day I decided to try it again months later. And I'm setting up, I light my candle, I have a CD of Gregorian chant I put on very softly in the back. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm grumbling, I can't do this, I'm not good enough to do this, why am I bothering doing this? The minute I sat down on my chair, I felt a presence enter the room, and it was so strong, I stood up and said, who's there? The room was dark except for the candlelight. I was in my second floor bedroom and the door was shut, so nobody came in. So I figured it's my imagination, and I sat back down again. And the minute I sat down, I was engulfed by love. I was filled with love, both inside and outside. It was like a bubble around me, and it was a slight pressure on both sides. And before I knew it, tears were running down my face. I'm singing hallelujahs and praise God. And as this went on for quite a while, and as I'm sitting there, I thought, I'm like the prodigal daughter returning and being hugged by the father, welcomed back. And the message that I was left with when it faded was, you can't pray wrong, you can't make a mistake. God hears you and loves you regardless of how you view it. And there's no need to be angry with myself for not doing it correctly.
Thank you.
So
That's wonderful. Would anyone else like to share who you identify with right now or have in the past?
Without going into great details, my life has, I have experience of the prodigal son, in that I actually have two brothers that decided that they wanted to get their inheritance. And long story short, they decided to lock my mother up and drafted a document and distributed all her assets to themselves. And and she just always and I had to take her out of Nigeria to come live with me in Michigan so they don't kill her to get her property and her assets. So that story always touched me, but she always forgave them, every time I said, let me sue them, and I could make a phone call, and I could have them locked up for years, the Chief Justice of the country was my classmate in Nigeria. I could make a phone call and they would be beaten up. And she said it time and time again, don't do that. So I always felt like the son, his younger son, that they took all his property, money and everything and wealth, and within 5-6 years, they squandered everything that she ever built. So I still working through letting go of that.
Well, RJ, thank you for sharing that. With that in mind, like why your mother would do that, would follow through with that. I'd like you to get into groups again. Talk a bit about who you identify with, but also I'd like you to talk a bit about, in this case, the father's actions in the parable. How do you perceive that? How does it speak to you? I mean, the father was willing to go through with what the younger son wanted, a portion of the inheritance, and willing to let go with the younger son too. And remember, family was everything, right? I mean, if you had your identity, your future, your ability to survive was all based on family. Without the family, I mean, you have nothing. I'd like you to talk a bit about that. What do you think about that? The ability for the father to let go, even though I'm sure it must have broken his heart on so many levels, and then the father to welcome back. So let's just break into maybe 2 groups this time, just thinking of the time. Maybe 2 big groups, and talk about that, and how does it make you feel? Where do you find yourself in that story? Now, without saying reasons why, I just want to see hands for a second, okay? Don't have to give any explanation. So who identifies most with the father? Hands up. Hi, hands high, just so the video can see. Okay. Next, who identifies with the prodigal son? Just the one, 2. How about the older brother? Okay, now the older brother. Let's go through that for a second. For those who identify with the older brother, would anyone like to share why? Why?
I don't know
Very-
exactly why, but I'm an only child.
I'm an only child. I never had to share anything,
Okay.
which maybe I was selfish, I don't know, probably, but not really. And so I just, I don't know what it's like to have to share from my family's wealth, or lack thereof, mostly lack thereof. But I sometimes have a hard time letting go of things and have some resentment when I feel slighted.
Okay. Thank you. Who else? Laura?
This is kind of weird, it's kind of backwards, but my older sister would be like the younger son. She's 3 years older. She was the pretty one, very outgoing, very popular. We're totally different. She's an extrovert, very willful. She got to do what she wanted, and I was quiet and shy and very, yeah, I'll do the chores, yeah, I'll stay out of trouble. and she got to go do all her stuff, and I ended up weeding the yard and doing all the chores, and she was out doing all this other stuff, and I was the one at home being good. So yeah, I feel like the older son, still.
Thank you. Anyone, can anyone relate to that? Can anyone? Carol? No? This, as we think of that story, and as you identified with someone, and again, it changes, where you may identify with someone when you were younger, or through the years, you might be the father some point. You might be the one having to let go, or you might be the one trying to return, or whatever, or the one with jealousy and resentment, perhaps. But what does the story teach us about God's love and God's faithfulness, and how do we fit into that? Can you think about how the story speaks about God's love for us, and how love sometimes can mean letting go? Anybody?
What I've always gotten from the story was that, for a long time now,
it's helped me a lot, this story. When I saw it was the gospel on Sunday, I thought, oh, this will be good to hear about. But because it's been so special to me, because it's given me it gives me an insight into God's unconditional love. And that, we have to, not only does he love us, but I have found many challenges, especially with one of my kids, that, unconditional love was what carried us through. That's because of God's love for me.
Other thoughts or comments? Other thoughts or comments? Anybody?
This may sound weird in this context, but given the personalities of my two brothers and I just wonder how my parents ever did it. Because they were perfect examples, really, of unconditional love. And I think each one of the three of us knew that. We never strayed terribly far, but we came damn close.
Thank you. As we sort of round up this session, who do you think had the biggest challenge to let go in the story? The father let go of the son, or the youngest one to let go of the pride and shame and everything else, and letting go? And then, of course, the older son. He had a lot of jealousy and resentment and superiority, I think, a bit too, right? Although maybe that's just one element of it. So who do you think had the biggest challenge?
The older son.
The older
The
son?
older son.
So you say older son? Who says older son? Who says younger son? Father? There's a lot of equal and hard letting go. The father let go of his child, maybe never to see him again. I couldn't imagine how that must feel. The younger son, the shame, what he did to the family name, to himself. I mean, again, the context, we don't necessarily understand the context, but the cultural context of the time. I mean, what he did was terrible. And to be able and to come back, even to become maybe a servant to the father or the family, to be put into a situation where he was starving, working with pigs, again, context here, right? Context. So all of them had challenges at different levels, different kinds of challenges. Letting go. And letting go in love, I mean, the Father's love, definitely. So things to think about as you go through the next few days, the next few sessions of the reflections. So tomorrow is Setting Free Love, which is on page 47. You know, if you love something, set it free. Yeah. And then on Thursday, letting go of anger that blocks love. That's a big one also. And Friday about perfectionism. For sure. And then we'll end up going into next week's theme of letting go of shoulds. The shoulds. Right? So lots to still think about. Again, just like every week, underline, write down, circle. If there's something that strikes you as you're reading the daily reflections, you don't have to share it, but if there's something you feel really spoke to you, that has meaning for you, or was a revelation, like, you know what, never really thought about it that way, but now I do, and share it next week if you can. We'll have the opening part to share a bit from this week's session. Let us finish off with a prayer, and this comes from a person some of you may know, John Cassian, who taught meditation. He was one of the early church fathers, back in, I think, don't quote me on the video here, that's 500s or 600s, I think, was when he lived. So let us pray. O God, be all my love, all my hope, all my striving. Let my thoughts and words flow from you. My daily life be in you, and every breath I take be for you. Amen. Thank you, everyone.